Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar of our NACA, Nepali Academics in America, Population and Public Health, P2H Special Interest Group. We conduct this research webinar quarterly, so every 3 months. Today we have a special and distinguished speaker, Dr. Arati Maleku. She is an associate professor in the College of Social Work at the Ohio State University and a nationally recognized community engaged scholar and mixed methodologist. Her research interest is on migration, social rights, health equity, and well being among underserved populations, including immigrants, refugees, and international students. She is involved in several studies in the United States and Nepal. To address these areas, she employs community engaged mixed methods approaches that center community voices and partnerships, exploring how social, cultural, and structural factors influence health and daily lives. She is a dedicated mentor, has an outstanding track record of mentoring students, early career scholars, and community engaged researchers. She serves as an associate editor of the British Journal of Social Work, a highly reputed journal in her field. She has served in several national leadership roles, including President of Nepal Rising, and as you all know, she is the current president of NACA. Today, however, she joins us as a researcher to share findings from her study on care and survival among single mothers in Nepal. With that, the floor is yours, Dr. Maleku.
Thank you, Sarib Dai, for that kind introduction. Felt a little exaggerated, but thank you. Namaste, everyone, and good afternoon. Today, I'm pleased to share, I should say, preliminary findings from one of the larger situational analysis of single mothers conducted in Nepal. And this presentation examines the multidimensional realities of single mothers, moving beyond income poverty to understand caregiving responsibilities, economic insecurity, and structural barriers that shape their everyday lives. I'll also discuss what these findings mean for gender-responsive social protection in Nepal and other low and middle income countries. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this work was a truly collaborative effort. I want to recognize my co-investigator, Dr. Lily Kim from Louisiana State University, who is here today, along with our funding partner, the Einstrong Foundation. I also want to thank Nepal Rising, our diaspora partner, Karmayog Foundation, and the Baraha Municipality, and all of our community partners in Nepal who made this work possible. Most importantly, I really want to express my gratitude to the 912 single mothers who generously shared their experiences and trusted us with their stories. And obviously, without them, this research would not have been possible. I'd like to briefly share how this study began. This was during my sabbatical. I had gone to Nepal end of 2024, beginning of 2025, and I wasn't really traveling to Nepal to conduct a research study on single mothers. A project opportunity emerged through Nepal Rising and the Einstrong Foundation, and I was basically entrusted to lead the implementation of the Mother Strong program in the Baraha municipality in eastern Nepal. As our team worked alongside these local partners and spent time in communities alongside the Koshi River, something became increasingly clear. We met women who were carrying extraordinary responsibilities. They were the sole provider for their families, primary caregivers for their children, and often the only source of stability within their households. And yet, despite this tremendous resilience, their experiences were largely invisible within the available evidence, invisible to also the local leaders and policymakers. And so, what began as a program implementation effort quickly became an opportunity to ask a much broader question. What are the lived realities of single mothers in Nepal? And that question became the foundation for this study I'm sharing with you today. And before we specifically look at Nepal, I'd like to briefly place this work within the broader global context. It's important to recognize that the challenges faced by single mothers are not unique to one country. Across many low and middle income countries and fragile settings, single mothers occupy one of the most economically and socially vulnerable positions within society. They are often simultaneously the primary caregivers, primary income earners, and primary decision makers for their households. Yet they frequently experience disproportionate levels of income insecurity, unpaid care responsibilities, also cultural barriers like social exclusion and chronic psychosocial stress. And importantly, these challenges rarely occur in isolation. They reinforce one another in a self-perpetuating cycle where, as you can see in this figure, economic insecurity increases caregiving burdens, which then limits the opportunities for education and employment. It contributes to psychological stress and affects family well-being, and then ultimately perpetuates disadvantage across generation. This pattern has been documented across many low middle income countries and suggesting that poverty among single mothers is fundamentally structural rather than simply the result of individual circumstances. And when we talk about Nepal, Nepal reflects many of these very similar dynamics. Nepal definitely provides a very particularly sort of this important context for understanding these structural vulnerabilities. More than one-third of households are female-headed, often as a result of widowhood, labor migration, which was extremely interesting to me when I was in Sunsari, really looking at the lived realities of these mothers. One of those ripple effects of labor migration, where policymakers, think that remittance is coming, they're in contact with these the husbands that leave these women, but they're not. They're really invisible, very absent fathers to these children. And that has also created a lot of social repercussions, such as, mothers eloping, and the children are left in the community to be just taken care by somebody else, right? Um, and it also a result of separation, divorce. And while Nepal has made important investments in social protection, including the single women allowance, these programs remain insufficient to address the multidimensional realities that these women face. If we think about economic insecurity, it's only one part of that story because many women also shoulder overwhelming caregiving responsibilities. And research over research, we've looked into this called as time poverty a lot. They experience limited education and employment opportunities and face significant psychosocial stress. And so during our field work in the Baraha municipality, these realities became visible not only in the data, but also through conversation with women, families, and community members. And this broader context motivated our study. So rather than really asking whether single mothers are poor, we asked a different question. What does multidimensional poverty actually look like in the everyday lives of single mothers? And how can understanding those realities inform most effective social protection? And so to answer that question, that's where this existing Mother Strong program comes in, which is developed by the Einstrong Foundation. The Mother Strong is a conditional basic income initiative designed to support single mothers living in poverty. The program provides direct digital cash transfers with one primary condition, and that is that children must remain enrolled in and attend school. And although today's presentation focuses on Nepal, Mother Strong has expanded to Uganda, Cambodia, and South Sudan, creating a very unique platform for implementation, learning, and comparative research across diverse low and middle income settings. And so for this presentation, we focus on the 912 single mothers enrolled in Nepal and use the baseline data to better understand the multidimensional nature of poverty before program implementation. The goal is not simply to evaluate a cash transfer program. It is really to understand the broader structural conditions shaping women's lives and also to really generate this evidence that can strengthen future policy and programming. So we designed this study with two primary objectives. One was we sought to understand the multidimensional realities of single mothers that were participating in the Mother Strong program. And we rather than just focusing on income poverty, we examined the socioeconomic conditions, multidimensional poverty, women's empowerment, financial well-being, and mental health. And second, we also aim to establish a rigorous baseline against which the future impact of the Mother Strong program can be evaluated. The study was conducted in Barachetra municipality. For those of you less familiar with this area, Barachetra is located in the eastern part of Nepal in Koshi province alongside the Koshi River. And data were collected across all these 11 program wards in the municipality that provided a very comprehensive picture of the women enrolled in the program and the communities in which they live. Now, to understand the lives of single mothers, we need sort of this guiding framework that moved beyond measuring poverty only in terms of income. And so we drew on two complementary theoretical perspectives. The first is Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum's capability approach, which argues that poverty is fundamentally a deprivation of capabilities, not just simply a lack of income. So in other words, what matters is not only the resources people have, but whether those resources translate into real opportunities to live the lives they value. The second is the feminist economics of care, which reminds us that women's unpaid caregiving is economically essential yet largely invisible in conventional economic measures. So when we think about this, in the case of single mothers, caregiving responsibilities, time poverty, and the gender structural inequalities can directly constrain employment opportunities, financial security, and also overall well-being. So together, these frameworks then helped us conceptualize poverty as multidimensional, shaped not just by economic resources, but also by unpaid care responsibilities, agencies, and the broader structural inequalities. So guided by these perspectives, we then examine these 5 interconnected domains: socioeconomic conditions, multidimensional poverty, women's empowerment, financial well-being, and mental health. And these domains form the foundation for both our data collection and our analysis. So let me now turn into the study's design. Our data collection was grounded in a community engaged approach, recognizing that trust and partnership are fundamental to rigorous research. Before collecting any data, I made several visits to Barachetra municipality to meet with the municipal leaders, ward chairs, community leaders, and the local stakeholders. As you can see in the picture here, going to also some of these school teachers in that area. And these visits were essential for building relationships, understanding the local context, and also assessing the community readiness, which helped in obtaining the local approvals and support. And they gave us an opportunity to listen to community perspectives and ensure that the research was responsive to the local priorities. We then trained local women as community data collectors, really equipping them with skills in research ethics, informed consent, confidentiality, and administration of the survey instrument. And working with local data collectors obviously strengthened both the quality of the data and community trust throughout the process, but also provided a platform for many of these local women that really did not really before this phase knew the power of data. So that was another, impactful ripple effect that has happened. I'll share that later. So the other thing that happened was this idea around traditional research and how we collect data, right? So here, data were collected through communities, women's circles, and local gathering sites, right? That allowed women to participate in familiar and accessible environments rather than requiring them to travel elsewhere. And during this data collection, as you can see in the picture, it was so profoundly impressive in the way that these women's circle became spaces for healing for these women. And that really, made me think about culturally responsive data collection mechanisms, which then later helped me come back to the Ohio State University and develop a doctoral level course on global research method, ethics, and practice that has now been approved, and I'll be teaching that in the spring semester. So here, our final sample included 912 single mothers participating in the Mother Strong program across all the 11 wards of Barha municipality in Koshi province, making this, to our knowledge, one of the largest studies of single mothers conducted in Nepal. And I'd like to point that, for us, relationship building was not simply a preliminary step before research. It was an integral part of the research methodology. So in terms of the women participants, right, as you can see here, might be a bit busy, but I'll try to do my best to go through this slide. The average participant was 43 years old, and just over half, 51%, were widowed, reflecting one of the primary pathways into single motherhood in Nepal. Livelihoods were highly precarious. Nearly 58% depended on daily wage labor. They called it Janban. It was the local language I learned. While another 22% relied primarily on agriculture, both sources of income that are often seasonal and unstable. Perhaps the most striking finding is that more than 85% of participants were living on less than 5,000 Nepali rupees per month, approximately 37 US dollars per month, at the time of data collection. And despite these limited resources, these women were supporting household averaging 3.7 people while caring for an average of about 2 children under the age of 18. And so these characteristics paint a picture of women carrying substantial caregiving responsibilities while navigating profound economic insecurity. But again, income alone does not tell the full story. To better understand this complexity, we next examined multidimensional poverty. And that was using the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, developed by, Sabina Alkire and the Oxford Poverty Center. And that this has also been a multidimensional scale that has been used across countries, including Nepal. And unlike these traditional measures that define poverty solely in terms of income, MPI really captures these multiple dimensions of deprivation across education, living standards, and health, which provides a much more comprehensive picture of people's lived realities. And in our study, the average MPI score was 0.34 with a standard deviation of 0.11, which is a particularly important finding because under the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index framework, a score of 0.33 or higher classifies a household as multidimensionally poor. So in other words, the average single mother in our study exceeded the international threshold for multidimensional poverty. And looking at what contributed most to deprivation, education emerged as the largest contributor, followed by living standards and health. And it's important to note that education here extends beyond years of schooling. It also reflects whether children are actually able to attend school, remain in school, and whether families can afford school-related expenses. And during our fieldwork, many mothers described struggling to pay for school uniforms, books, transportation, and other school-related expenses. Financial hardship often, disrupted children's education, despite their desire to keep them in school. And then the second largest contributor was living standards, which reflects the basic conditions families need to live with dignity. It includes, adequate housing, electricity, clean drinking water, sanitation, cooking fuel, and any sort of productive assets such as livestock or farming equipment that help families earn a living. And here, although health contributed less to the overall MPI, it remained a very important area of deprivation. So as you can see here, nearly half of participants reported inadequate prenatal care, highlighting persistent barriers to accessing essential health services as well. So overall, these findings reinforce a central message of this study that poverty among single mothers is not simply a lack of income. It is a multidimensional experience that's shaped by educational disadvantage, inadequate living conditions, and health-related barriers that together constrain women's capabilities and opportunities. And so beyond the multidimensional poverty, we also looked at women's empowerment, financial well-being, and mental health. And at first glance, the findings appear somewhat paradoxical, right? So on the one hand, you can see most women reported being the primary decision makers within their household. More than 80% made decisions regarding finances, children's education, and healthcare, and approximately 3/4 reported having decision-making freedom and confidence in accessing resources. These findings suggest that single mothers possess considerable agency. However, agency alone does not guarantee opportunity. And so financially, the picture was far more concerning. Nearly 92% rated their financial situation as poor or very poor, and 82% reported having no stable source of income. And 3 out of 4 lacked productive assets that could generate sustainable livelihoods. And consistent with these findings, women also reported low financial self-efficacy, high financial anxiety, and very low levels of both life satisfaction and employment satisfaction. We also observed elevated symptoms of anxiety and depression across the sample. When we take these together, these findings highlight an important distinction that these women do not lack agency. They are making decisions, they are leading their households and caring for their families every day. What they lack are the structural opportunities and resources that are needed to translate that agency into income security and improved well-being. So this sort of distinction reinforces the central argument of the capability approach. Having the freedom to make decisions is fundamentally different from having the capabilities and opportunities to achieve the life one values. In order to better understand the heterogeneity within this population, we conducted a two-step cluster analysis using 5 key indicators: the multidimensional poverty, stable income, productive assets, health, and education. And rather than identifying a single profile of poverty, the analysis revealed 6 distinct vulnerability profiles, ranging from relatively secure households to those experiencing severe multidimensional deprivation. So here, the key finding is that single mothers are not a homogeneous population. Their needs differ substantially depending on the combination of economic resources, assets, education, health challenges that they experience. And as you can see on the slide, at one end, only 7% of women were classified as fully secure. At the other end, 22% experienced both economic insecurity and significant health deprivation. And perhaps the most important point here is that nearly 2/3, about 64.2%, belong to the economically insecure clusters, lacking both stable income and productive assets. So in order to simplify these findings, we synthesized the 6 clusters into 3 overarching poverty profiles. And only 7% of mothers were economically secure with both stable income and productive assets. Another 29% were partially secure, possessing either stable income or productive assets, but not both. And the largest group, however, was the economically insecure profile that represented 64.2% of the sample. And these women lacked both stable income and productive assets and experienced the highest levels of multidimensional vulnerability. Here, two factors consistently distinguish the profiles: stable income and productive assets. And these emerged as the strongest predictors of the cluster membership. Um, Yet one finding cut across every profile, as you can see. Education deprivation remained persistently high, regardless of their level of economic security. Barriers to education were pervasive, reinforcing that education is not simply another indicator of poverty, it is one of its defining dimensions for single mothers. So overall, these findings suggest that poverty among single mothers is both multidimensional and heterogeneous, which then means that it requires interventions that move beyond one-size-fits-all approaches. After identifying the 6 distinct multidimensional poverty profiles, our next question was very straightforward. Do these different poverty profiles translate into differences in women's mental health and well-being? And so to answer that question, we conducted multiple regression analyses using the most economically secure group, which is the cluster 1, as the reference category, while controlling for age, marital status, household size, and the number of children. And what we found was remarkably consistent. Women in the more economically insecure clusters experienced significantly worse mental health outcomes. For anxiety, women in clusters 2, 3, 5, and 6 reported significantly higher symptoms than the reference category, with the strongest effects observed among women experiencing the greatest economic insecurity. There was also a very similar pattern that emerged for depression. Women in clusters 3, 5, and 6 had significantly higher levels of depressive symptoms, again with the largest burden among the economically insecure groups. For life satisfaction, the direction was reversed. Women in clusters 3, 4, 5, and 6 reported significantly lower life satisfaction, with the greatest reduction among women experiencing the highest levels of multidimensional deprivation. So importantly, most of the demographic characteristics, including age, household size, number of children, were not significant predictors. Instead, it was women's poverty profile that consistently explained these differences in mental health and well-being. And the takeaway here is that not all poverty looks the same. There are different configurations of deprivation that carry very different consequences for women's psychological well-being. Women facing overlapping economic insecurity and multidimensional deprivation experience substantially poorer mental health and lower life satisfaction than women with greater economic security. And so these findings reinforce our central argument that multidimensional poverty is not simply an economic condition, it is also a mental health and a well-being issue. So in other words, how poverty is experienced matters just as how much and as how much poverty exists. So those were some of the preliminary findings. And when we bring all of these together, what do these findings tell us? I think there are 3 key messages. First, poverty among single mothers is fundamentally multidimensional. It extends well beyond income to include educational opportunities, living conditions, mental health, and women's capabilities to make meaningful choices for themselves and their families. Second, vulnerability is not uniform. So our cluster analysis identified 6 distinct poverty profiles, which demonstrated that women experience very different combinations of strengths and constraints. Some struggle primarily with economic insecurity, while others face overlapping deprivations. This tells us that one-size-fits-all interventions are unlikely to be effective. Third, and perhaps the most important one, is that systems matter. The barriers we identified, such as limited educational opportunities, economic insecurity, inadequate assets, unpaid care responsibilities, and structural inequalities interact to constrain women's opportunities over the life course. So findings shift that conversation from individual deficits to structural capability. Single mothers are not living in poverty because they lack resilience. If anything, our findings suggest the opposite. These women demonstrate extraordinary resilience every single day. They care for their children, manage households, make difficult financial decisions, and continue moving forward despite profound structural barriers. So basically, single mothers are not living in poverty because they lack resilience. They are living in poverty despite extraordinary resilience. So, therefore, the challenge is not to build more resilient women, it is to build systems that expand women's capabilities. How do we reduce structural barriers and create the conditions for women and their families to thrive? And I believe that this is the broader implication of the work, not only for Nepal, but for many low and middle income countries facing very similar challenges. While these findings sort of paint a very sobering picture, they also provide a clear roadmap for action. Our evidence suggests that supporting single mothers requires moving beyond income support alone. There should be policies that must address the interconnected realities of income insecurity, educational opportunity, mental health, unpaid care responsibilities, and also women's agency. And there are several priorities for policy and practice. Firstly, strengthening gender-responsive social protection to improve economic security, reducing barriers that prevent children from remaining in school because education emerged as the largest contributor to multidimensional poverty. And it is just sad in the advent of the 21st century, when the AI era has taken place, we are still talking about education. These schools in Nepal, in the Bara Kshetra that I saw, there were no schools and desks and benches and stuff like that. And thirdly, mental health and psychosocial support needs to be integrated into poverty reduction programs rather than treating them as separate issues. And when we even think about mental health and mental well-being, that alone is a different can of worms when we think about Nepal. It's important to recognize and reduce unpaid care work, which limits women's time, economic participation, and opportunities. And finally, investing in women's capabilities by really strengthening their decision-making power, access to productive assets, economic opportunities. And so ultimately, the message from this study is very straightforward. Poverty is multidimensional, and our responses must be multidimensional as well. And when we invest not only in women's incomes, but also in their education, health, agency, and care systems, we create the conditions for families and future generations to thrive. Now, I'd like to just end by sharing where this work is going. What really began as a baseline study in Nepal did more than generate evidence. It really influenced the strategic direction of the Armstrong Foundation. As the findings from Nepal emerged, the foundation recognized that many of these questions extended beyond a single country. And rather than evaluating one program in one setting, they launched a competitive request for proposals to conduct a rigorous multi-country evaluation across all of their Mother Strong programs, and then that is anchored in some of these baseline data that we collected in Nepal. And so our team, including Dr. Kim, who is here today, were selected to lead that evaluation. And so today, this work has expanded beyond Nepal to include Uganda, in one of the largest refugee resettlement sites in BD, Cambodia, and South Sudan, in which is also a very active conflict zone. And so building on the Nepal baseline, we're using a mixed methods approach moving forward to examine whether these multidimensional patterns are consistent across diverse humanitarian and development context, and to understand how local contexts shape women's experiences of poverty, capability, and resilience. And ultimately, our goal is to generate comparative evidence that can inform more effective gender responsive social protection across LMICs. And for me, this represents the most exciting part of this journey. We are moving beyond documenting poverty in one place to building a cross-country evidence base that helps us understand what works, for whom, and under what conditions. And because the ultimate goal is not simply to reduce poverty, it is to expand women's capabilities, strengthen families, and create opportunities for the next generation. As I reflect on this journey, I'm reminded that the study began with a very simple question. What are the realities facing single mothers in one municipality of eastern Nepal? What we discovered was far more complex than poverty measured by income alone. We found evidence of multidimensional hardship. But we also found something equally important. We found extraordinary strength. We found women who continue to care for their children, make very difficult decisions, and hold their families together despite profound structural barriers. These women are not waiting to be resilient, they already are. And our responsibility as researchers and practitioners and policymakers, funders, and I have to give a shout out to social workers, is not simply to ask them to overcome more adversity. It is to build systems that recognize their strengths, expand their capabilities, and remove the barriers that limit their opportunities. Because when we invest in single mothers, we are not simply reducing poverty, we are investing in human potential, we are expanding capabilities, we are strengthening families, and we are creating opportunities for the next generation. I'll leave you with that note, and thank you for giving me this platform to share my findings of our study in Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maleku. That was really, really interesting. And so what we will do is we will open questions for everybody and we'll try to have a discussion. So while everybody is thinking about that, first of all, let us give her a virtual, clap in terms of this outstanding work that she's doing, which is not only important, like she said, in the context of Nepal, but, it's been expanded to other countries as well. So I will start with one question that I have. So one of the things, Dr. Maliku, that you have been saying and emphasizing throughout is that one size does not fit all. Right. So, even with your own population, it looks like, when you're looking at the poverty, kind of thing, there were 6 groups and, there was a majority of them fell in one group. So within that, I have 2 questions. One is specific to your, study, but then also one is general, and which I will open it to everybody. One is like, how is poverty defined, right? Because I don't know whether there is a universal a definition of poverty, and if the poverty at one place is the same as the other one. And in that context, when you bring a tool like developing an index or matrix, like in your case that you were developing with different components, can that be generalizable at all places? Like how you defined it in Nepal, does that need to be changed when you do it in Cambodia? Does one component have a different weight than the other places? So I just wanted your thoughts on how you developed the tool. Was it specific for Nepal? Was it validated? And when you plan to do it at other countries, what are the plans in terms of transferring knowledge? This is more specific for yours as well, but I welcome from everybody else how they've been dealing with it when they bring their tools to Nepal.
Absolutely. Thank you for that extremely thoughtful question. In terms of the definition of poverty, right, there are different definitions. And if you look at the definition in the US used from 1950, is extremely, old. And there has been conversations around that, but that has not changed. Across other countries, there are different definitions of poverty, but that was why we used the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, because it is really looking at poverty as um, the magnitude of deprivation in key areas, as you could see in the MPI index. That is an index developed by Oxford Poverty, OPHI, I cannot remember the full name. Bonita Didi may help me out here. OPHI and at Oxford University. That is uh, that the foundation knowledge was the capability approach of Amartya Sen, right? So that was the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index. It has also been an index used across the world, including Nepal. Now there is, almost each of those indicators has, dimension has 13 or 40 indicators, but those indicators really it differs across different countries. Now, in the case of Nepal, I went to what CBS, Central Bureau of Statistics, has used as poverty measure in Nepal with the global multidimensional poverty index. And there were one or two items that was tweaked, but I followed what was used in Nepal to use this for the study. In other countries, we are going to not just use this as an anchor, but also look at the unique situation and context in other countries to make some tweaks. And that's what, culturally responsive metrics really mean, right? But these are validated indicators used across countries. And the challenge for us right now is to see how this can be adapted into some fragile context, right, in South Sudan, an active conflict zone, and in BDBT, which is one of the largest refugee resettlement sites. So we are, that's where the community engaged approach is so important, to work with the local leaders, the field workers, the local government, to make sure that some of these indicators that we're using are culturally responsive. This is exactly why we cannot just use these metrics, but also use some of these lived experiences and stories from the field so that we get comprehensive data. And that's why we are choosing to use a mixed methods approach going forward in these four countries. But I also welcome anybody to chime in. Bonita Diti, thank you. It's the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Index.
That's correct. And they use the relative poverty indicators rather than the absolute poverty. I think absolute poverty is the standard now. It's what, $2 and something cents set by World Bank. But they use the relative poverty because, as your question said, social determinants vary in different countries for various reasons. Yeah. Great presentation. Amazing research, Arati.
Thank you. Other thoughts from anybody?
All right, so I will get the conversation going, I guess. First of all, thank you, Dr. Maleku, for such an interesting presentation. I don't have a question, but more of a comment, and that I wanted to share. And this was a conversation I was having with somebody, like one of the community leader in Eastern Nepal. That's where I'm from, and this was a couple of years ago. And the conversation was around the closure of a school, local school, and this was different than what you observed in Bara, etc. And so in this area, a lot of the men had migrated to work on the Gulf region and so on and so forth, and family like well off had moved away to the city. So really, like, this local school had shut down, right? So we were having conversation around that topic, and he said something that really touched me, and I even think about this to this day, and it reminded me during your presentation. And he said the situation there was so bad. The women's, obviously were living on, they were married women, but in a sense, but they were literally living on their sort of like the husband had left, and the situation was so bad. It was just like women and the elderly people. And he said when somebody dies on the village, I mean, typical Hindu tradition on that part is like it's the male who carries the dead body to the river for cremation. And he was saying like there were nobody to carry the dead, so it was the women who had to step up and carry the dead to the river for cremation. And it was that bad, and it just like reminded me of the this evolving role of women and the society, and traditionally in conservative society like Nepal, and how they have to step up, and I mean, that's a very, very rapid change, right? And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. If you looked at how women's role traditionally are changing now, and what other things that you observed in the community that you were studying.
Absolutely, those were very similar realities there as well. Um, the grandmothers were also stepping up. Now, if you remember, I don't know if it was a very busy side on the demographics, but the age was on average 43 years
Mhm.
because it ranged from 18 to 88. And here, I know first we were supposed to implement the program, right? So really advocating for the grandmothers to also be counted as single mothers, because oftentimes because of that social problem, um, you know, fathers being absent, either migration, mostly migration, and then mothers eloping. These are young women, grandmothers taking a role, raising these grandchildren. They are single mothers. And so, although they did not fit with the traditional single mother eligibility criteria that Armstrong was using across other contexts, that was true in Nepal. And so these grandmothers were also included in the program as single mothers. And that's why the age range was from 18 to 88, making the average around 43 years old. Yeah, that was extremely true, and that is what really motivated me to really look at this population and collect data when we went to implement the program.
So, Arati, just a clarification on the definitions, and you had a 50% were widows, right? So, and in your definition, you said, well, women who are single because of the husband migration, and if you look at your statistics, you don't see a lot of them. So what is it that the grandmothers are now taking care of the children? Or can you kind of go
Yeah,
through?
no, that's actually a very good question, and that's something that I'm also looking into. What happened was this was not true when we had started data collection. So during data collection, we were seeing this. So we put that in. I should have clarified that. So thanks for bringing that up. In the other category is what we put, right? And so there was some eligibility criteria on, were you in contact with the husband? Were you getting remittance? And it needed a lot of those, triaging of information. So that also eliminated some women that were impacted by labor migration, but were not necessarily eligible to be in the program. So that's why that demographic is there, but with some limitations and caution that we need to be mindful that because the municipal, we had to triage that information, right? So what we did was there was a list that was given from the municipality office, and also there were volunteers that were recruited to go door to door to verify information. So during that time, some of that might have been lost, although some of those issues were very critical. But the other category are those women that were eligible and that were impacted by labor migration. There's also one small category where it said living with a partner, but that was basically women-headed household where the husbands were largely absent because of illness or disability or some other circumstances, and they were such an impoverished sort of families that were made eligible to be in the program. But overall, there's just, again, the heterogeneity of the women-headed households, right? Like single mothers, because of these different pathways, but also single mothers because of some social repercussions that has been happening because of labor migration and the like. But that's a very good question in itself, and that needs to be clarified more for sure. So as we are looking into the second phase of data collection, we have that in the so it sort of helped us refine the data collection even more going forward.
I also have a very quick question, and yes, like others said, very great presentation. I was just curious if women who were sharing the household were eligible in a study? Let's say mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, if they were together in the household, and if yes, did you see, and you might not have done this analysis yet, but were there any differences? Because that could be some sort of social support in there, right? So that could have mitigated some of the.
If the mother was present, if the single mother is present with the children and she's the primary caregiver, it was the mother. We did not look at the grandmother. But in the absence of the single mother, if the grandmothers were taking care of those children, they were basically the single mothers caring for those children.
So that means they would not be eligible if they were sharing the household with another adult.
Not both. The support could not be given to two individuals in a single household because, again, from equity perspective, right, it's very difficult, such a small group of women. And the thing that really was surprising to me is that how is it possible that in a small area like Bara Chhatra, there are thousands of women that are single mothers? That was the major question that when I went in, I'm like, how is it possible to have so many single mothers? So then as we sort of started unraveling some of these things, yeah, it is this, it is this, it is this, and there is this negative ripple effects of labor migration and other things. And in that Koshi province, right, in that area, it's really Bara Chhatra near the Koshi River, there's also a lot of people with no citizenship, and all of those things happen. It's also like a lot of Musahar community, one of the most disadvantaged community in Nepal, right? So there's a lot of those social dynamics playing a role. And as we are now moving further into the second phase of data analysis and also capturing lived experience through qualitative data, that should unravel some of these things further. So, I mean, the quant data only does not tell the entire story. And so as we move forward, we will also be talking to the community leaders, and the municipal government has been extremely collaborative in the whole process. They were so interested in the data as well. So, we are creating a research brief for the local municipal government as well, to really show the situational analysis of single mothers in that area, hoping that could create some sort of local policy impact.
There's a question in chat that says, I was wondering how the money was transferred in total.
I was just wondering how much money was transferred in total. So money-wise, it is through a digital cash app. It is through a digital app. And the mothers don't directly get money, okay? They get one mother, if you have two kids, gets about $15 a week, but they don't get cash. They get, $15 worth of opportunity to buy food, school uniform, things like that for the household. And that goes to the merchants. Merchants are basically all of these. So that was another thing that also impacted that area, was we also needed to recruit merchants and businesses that could provide these supplies to the women, right? And so that also expansion of that is also what has happened is there were many young men that were going to leave the local area when this program was brought in. That actually provided opportunity for them to generate their own income. So there are tons of young men that are in the program as merchants, providing all of these essential facilities and support. And over time, what has happened now is some of these single mothers are also becoming merchants. Okay, so they're running businesses, stuff like that is happening. So I am not really sure about the total money, but each mother would get about $15 per week. And the program has been going on since January of 2025.
So one other thing that as I was listening to you was you mentioned that the age group of those caretakers were from 18 to 88. That is a broad range. So I was wondering, and I understand that it's very important to get different perspective, but I would be a little bit hesitant to put specifically what you get out of the qualitative, data that you have together, because 18-year-old and a 20-year-old's perspective might be totally different than an 80 or 88-year-old. So did you guys, maybe I missed it, but did you guys do the analysis separately, or do you have plans to do it separately?
We have plans to do it separately, but that's the beauty of doing a mixed method study, is also doing qualitative data, right? So in the qualitative data, we will have perspectives on differences across, and there's many opportunities for many kinds of analysis now, even to look at the demographic differences, which we have not gotten into, but we will. But it is important to note that, if you just look at age as a factor, the context matters, right? Why is it 18 to 88? Because, these were also grandmothers, but, if you think about, from a social justice perspective and everything, yeah, they are single mothers taking care for their grandchildren, not the mothers, but they are the mother figure in the family. But no, I agree that you need to look at the differences, and going forward, the qualitative data is going to really, bring out much more clear, I think, or a comprehensive story to the data.
And I think there's one question from
Thanks
Pratibha.
for Pratibha. We will look into that. For today, I did not present that, but some of the analysis, again, a very preliminary analysis, but we will get to that as well. There were quite a few. I would say, like, just off the top of my head, just because I was in the field, data collection, right? So it's probably about, out of 100%, I would say at least 25 to 30% were grandmothers.
Yeah, if I have to, I'm sorry, speculate, they're 50% widow, right? And that means a lot of them probably are grandmothers taking, so it's probably a significant.
There were a lot of younger women too. And again, if we look at the, we look at the data and run some demographic differences, that probably will be clear. We have not done that at this point, but we do plan to do that.
Thank you. It's very interesting because you have a great number, 900, that's plus. So I feel like it's lots of potential to have different mixed method analysis for sure.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for that depth.
You would be teaching a global research on what are some challenges you face collecting this data? Challenges facing the data that we had a very short time frame. And then getting all these approvals for data collection. I also got approval from, obviously, the OSU IRB, but it was also approval from the local municipal government. And I think trying to really think about this as training these women, that was a bit challenging, because every time you would ask for a volunteer, it would be a young man, right? And so all these community leaders, everybody is a man, and it's like, okay, but this program is for single mothers, and I want to see more women. So those were some challenges to really find women that would be interested, and so there were all of these different strategies that had to be applied to bring in a group of women that would be engaged in collecting data. And some of the very interesting things that have happened is these girls that were my data collectors, once trained and got engaged, they were dropped out from high school, and they now have decided to go back to school, and some have gone to Biratnagar to go to college and stuff like that. So those have been some very heartwarming effects of engaging these girls in the community.
And
some
you said,
yeah.
sorry, just as a follow-up, you said something along the line of this was the first time, people were engaging in research. Can you speak a little bit more about what your experience was, and also what the outcome of that? Was that one of the things that happened where girls would?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that happened, but it's also like, as community engaged researchers, we wear different hats, right? And as a social worker, when we engage a community into research and data collection, you wear different hats. And it's also making sure that the data that we collect is responsive, that the community members tell that story, and at the same time it is impactful to the local area, right? So those have always been at the forefront of my work, whether that work is done in the US or in Nepal. And so really building that rapport in the beginning, training people, being able to listen, making those tweaks in data collection, as I mentioned, right? If traditionally we think about data collection this way, but it's done very differently in a very collectivist society, that when we were asking women, do you want to be, you want to talk individually, do you want to be in a group? Every single person said, I want to be in a group, right? Or collectivist culture. And those spaces became like a healing circle for these women, as one were telling her stories, and another person would validate that and sort of give this sense of empowerment and encouragement and validate their feelings. It became like a very powerful healing circle where people were just encouraging one another, right? So those are some of the differences when we work with communities and sort of explore a little further from the traditional research methods that we are trained to do. It's not that linear, right? So over time, I have sort of really explored this and tried to really understand and being very open to hear from them. So even the data collection, right? Or training them, we went through all these questions, and these girls had a way to ask these questions very differently than how I had imagined. So, during that, there were a lot of refinements that went in, and that's how data were collected. And
I
yeah,
would want to
that
say that
actually,
your presentation, your slides were very attractive.
thank you. I try. The other thing I want to say is like that actually, and I did mention that when I was all of this experience that I had, and I had been doing some work in Nepal, not to this extensive level. And then when I came back to the Ohio State, I was like, I need to really do something around global research. And so there was this international social work course that was there, had not been taught. And I told the director that I wanted to revisit that and revamped it. The first time taught it. Shambika is here. She knows about this as well. And taught that the first time around into global ethics and, just the way how this idea around epistemic justice and all of these things are discussed, right? And so, yeah, that course went through. I taught it, then proposed to the faculty, and then we do have a course in the PhD level, not just at the college, but it's also we get students from across other colleges as well. So this will be the second time I'll be teaching it as Global Research Methods, Ethics, and Practice in the spring semester. And we recently also presented this at the Social Work and Social Development Conference in Kenya. And we are working on these 4 countries right now. Some very challenging, like the Uganda one. I don't even know when I will get the IRB approval, because at the BDBD site, there is 3-step sort of in-country regulation. So we're really stuck in that. All the other 3 countries, getting approval even from the commissioner's office in South Sudan, those have been done, but Uganda has been one of those challenging situation right now. But
with that, let's wrap this session up. Dr. Maleku, thank you very much. It was very insightful, and good luck in pursuing this further, because I think it's very, very important, not just for the community there, but like you saw, there are other countries using it, and we have other regions in Nepal that could definitely learn from your research and your findings.